Hello, welcome back. Today we're talking about something that comes up again and again in family law. The idea that court should be the last resort. Sir Andrew McFarlane has been clear. For families that don't need protection from abuse, court shouldn't be the first step, it should actually be the final one. But anyone working in family law knows that the principle can be hard to apply in real life. So what makes today's conversation particularly interesting is who's around the table with me. I'm joined by 3 other South Asian family lawyers. That matters because culture, family expectations and community pressures often shape decisions long before anyone thinks about court. So today's conversation is about when court is necessary and when it's not, and what families often expect the court to do. It's as simply as that. Let's start with the headline itself. But before we do, let me introduce my family lawyers who are around the table talking with us today. Harj.
Hello everybody, I'm Harjit Rait, Head of Family Law at LCF Law.
And I'm Sandeep Sandhu from Clarion, and I'm a Senior Associate within the team.
And I'm Sabeena Din from Milson Legal, Founder and Director of the firm.
Thank you. So Andrew McFarlane says that family court should be a last resort. So in your own extensive experience, does that reflect real life? Harj?
More and more so, yes. And I think the reason being the costs and the delay of taking cases to court. I think when I first started out, a lot more cases actually ended up in court, but I've found that with the introduction of non-court dispute resolution, the requirement for parties to have considered that before they can even issue court proceedings does keep some cases out of court, but whether that's the right thing or the right tactic to apply in a particular case depends on the circumstances of the case. Mm-hmm. So I have some cases where it's clear there is inequality of arms, control, coercive behaviour. To keep those kind of cases out of court and without that being managed by the court and having a firm timetable in place may not be in the best interests of your client. So you have to look at each case on its own facts and advise clients of all the options. But I have definitely seen a big shift to matters being dealt with outside of court, and a lot more options now available. It's not just mediation. There are I explain it to clients like the private option of having cases dealt with via non-court dispute resolution. So you don't have to go to court, but you have to pay to use that option. It's akin to an NHS option going to court. Private, you're paying for your judge. And I found a lot of success in those types of cases where you pick your judge, you pick your timetable, you pay your judge. It's outside of court, and I've had pretty much 100% success rate in settling cases that have gone down that route.
That's really good to hear. What about you, Sandeep? Similar?
Yeah, I think I have to echo a lot of what Harjit has just said there. I think there's a lot of pressure, especially on people from our community, to just go in straight away for a fight. And unfortunately, we then have to remind them, look, court is a last resort. It's very costly. There's delays in the court system. You're effectively leaving the decision to someone who doesn't know you, and basically they are then making the decision that affects the rest of your life. And so with the changes, with mediation now coming into effect far earlier and being used more than it was previously, say 10 years ago, I think mediation's great. We do a lot of private FDRs at Clarion. We have a lot of firms that come to us from London or the Midlands, and we are really utilising that resource because some clients just don't want to wait, because delay can lead to extra expense as well. So we're all for that, and I think the use of collaborative law as well is fantastic.
Yeah, okay. Sabeena, what about yourself? I mean, I know you run your own practice.
I do, yes.
So what's your experience been?
I find that in our South Asian communities that it's not just the client, it's the families involved. And I think that's the problem we have. And when you're trying to settle things out of court, you've got a clash of two families. And when you're out of court, I find that they're heavily involved. Well, when you're inside court, it is the two individuals that go inside court and they're battling out, if you want to, trying to come to a conclusion. And I find that even when you've got solicitors advising you out of court, you've got members of the family giving unsolicited advice to the clients that don't really need to be said or done, and I don't think that helps. So I think, yes, while it's good to have matters resolved out of court, I think in our community sometimes it can be difficult with the extended pressure of families, because I find that sometimes instead of husband and wife, mum and dad, it's two families at war.
Yeah.
And just sorry to interrupt on that, just to add to that point, I think they are also very quick to compare cases that they've previously heard of and say, well, that happened in so-and-so's case, why can't you get the same result? And I don't think they appreciate that each case is different. And I think we would have to emphasise that to them.
I also think it becomes a bit of a pride or on a issue that these families are at war sometimes, that they need to win. But often there are no winners or losers. But it takes on another sort of life, this case, when families are involved, be it South Asian or from other communities. But very often you do find, even when you see a client from a South Asian community, that they come with lots of family members who then all add their two penny's worth. Which sometimes can help, you know, but sometimes it can hinder resolution. But on the plus side, a lot of times families getting involved a lot earlier, as they do in our community, and mediating, which is something that they've been doing long before it became a requirement in family law, has helped a lot of families and resolved a lot of issues, and it's stayed within the family, it's saved time, it's saved cost. But that's not always the right solution. But I think there are two sides. Sometimes when it's got to the point where it's not they're going to separate, I think sometimes the families have to step back then. But often if they step in a lot earlier and they can help families resolve their differences, the families mediate almost, you know, they have often the best interests of the parties at heart when they think that there is a chance of resolution. It's when there's no chance of resolution that I think everybody then sort of digs their heels in and it becomes...
Grab the lawyers.
I think to pick up on something you said earlier, and for anyone listening, let's start from, when is court genuinely the right place to start? Sabeena.
So I think every case is different, and I think some cases have to go to court because of the nature of what's happened, for example, domestic abuse. And when you've in a situation where you've got the other person so controlled that there is no listening, and in those type of situations there is no option but to go to court. So I think in those type of cases, yes, court's your first step really, because sometimes, and I've had it loads of times when I've got women come to me, or men actually, and they've been in such a controlling relationship for all their life, they don't even know the wrong or the right, to be honest. And it's trying to inform them of the best way forward. But sometimes I know they leave the door and they might not come back again because they're controlled and manipulated to such an extent. They'll go back home and they'll change their mind because they're scared to make that first step. And I think once you've made that first step, it's a barrier breaker.
I think you're right to set out that where there's any kind of abuse involved, then the court should be one of the practical first steps. And Andrew McFarlane was clear about that. He was really talking about cases that don't have a safeguarding or an abuse element to it. Something that you said earlier, Harj, about families, and traditionally in our communities there's always been some mediators, whether it's the community mediator or the family mediator. But do you think, Sandeep, that sometimes that more damage can be caused with the intervention of extended family?
Absolutely. I think they don't actually appreciate the full background of what's been going on. And sometimes one party might be more reluctant or embarrassed to tell them what's actually been going on.
It can be quite personal, intimate, can't it? Some of the reasons.
Absolutely. And I think for females especially, there's this cultural emphasis on, you know, being respectful and you know, looking after the husband. And you know, now women are working, if not more, than men, and sometimes earning a lot more. So you know, things are shifting, but that's not progressing to those who are the generation above. And I think that can be quite difficult to combine.
You're saying the perspectives are quite different in terms of somebody older from our community might say, look, it'll look better for the child if you stay together. And for a while I know that outside of that community, I've seen through anecdotal experience and you know what I've read is that sometimes that's not always the right thing for a child or children. But I think some members of our community will say that it will look better, it will be better for the child even if you stay in a relationship that's kind of abusive. And so that's the damage that I was thinking about, that are their end goals and values and principles as to fixing this different to what the couple might be actually going through.
Well, I actually experienced that, Sarah, when I got divorced many years ago. And I had a certain member of my family advising my dad, saying that she should go back. And my dad was, you know, really strong and said, no, it's up to her. It's her decision if she wants to go back or not. And I was really lucky to have that support.
Absolutely.
But I was really taken aback by that comment, because I had 3 younger sisters still to marry, and they were worried about what the impact on their lives would be. And this is back in 2006. So, you know, a while ago, and things have really changed, but I do believe there's still elements of that in today's society.
It's really interesting you say that, because I've seen a shift. I've seen a real shift when I have clients that come in with their family, and they are listening to what their child or their niece or nephew need, and I'm finding that the family are supportive of them.
That's good to hear.
I've really noticed a shift, that irrespective of you know, how this separation may be viewed in the community, they're not as concerned now. They're more concerned about the safety and well-being of their child. And I think when a client has that support, and I'm not saying that all clients have that, but I have definitely noticed a shift when I'm seeing clients that are coming in with their family, that family wants what's best for that client, and that's definitely changed over the years. When I think divorce, separation has become a little bit more acceptable in the South Asian community, when parents are, we just need our children to be happy and healthy, and sometimes it's not right for them to stay together, so how can we untangle this as amicably as possible? I think it shifted to let's keep the family together to how can we deal with this, still via mediation and maybe family discussions, but how can we separate this couple with minimum impact.
So there's more of an acceptance of separated and maybe blended families.
I have definitely found that.
There has been a shift. But obviously it's taken so many years to get to that shift.
It has, and we've had all sorts of sort of like COVID came, we had backlogging courts, and the courts did their best. We've all been through that time period where resources were short, judicial availability was really difficult to arrange, so cases were taking a lot longer. I mean, we can talk about Pathfinder, which is sort of being running in our local area in a minute, but before I move on to the sort of the next question is, in terms of myth busters, and again for anyone who's listening, what myths would each one of you say that people think the court can fix, and what can't they fix in these kind of situations? Sabeena?
I think before I go on to that, I'm just going to say that there's this thing about having, you know, the community imaging the family. And I think rather than having a family together for the community, I think there's a little bit more acceptance from 20 years ago when I started of a happy family opposed to anything else. And then kind of coming to the myth, but I think my main one is I see a lot of men coming saying that the courts favour women, and I always say they don't. It's all about the children, what's right for them, what's right for their needs, and I think that's huge, because I get a lot of men coming and they actually they feel quite low because they feel they're going to go to court, but they're not going to achieve a good result because the courts favour women.
So that's a myth.
It's a massive myth.
Okay. And what about you, Sandy? What myths?
I think the main one for me, long before what Sabeena just said, was that the courts will split assets 50-50, and that's not right. Each case is decided on its own merits and the assets involved. So that's one of the things that we often have to correct clients on.
Right from the get-go.
Clients coming in and thinking because they were the one that went out to work that they are going to keep everything, even though they've been married 30-40 years, and the spouse that stayed at home has looked after the family and home to enable them to do that. But I have to go, but I worked every day.
If I had £1 for every time I heard that, you're right. Excuse me. They didn't contribute. They never put anything into the family. So, excellent myth to bust. I want to just pick up on what you said, Sabeena, because that was one of the questions I wanted to ask, and I'm glad you brought it up, is that fathers, and in particular South Asian fathers, now that we know that in family law, particularly in children's arrangements, and discussions around that, there's been a shift, right? From the premise that a child should know both parents.
Yeah.
Recently, it's more around whether there has been any domestic abuse of any shape or form. It's not just limited to physical, it could be financial, emotional.
Yeah.
So, you know, my team and I discussed that, especially for South Asian dads in particular, but you know, you touched upon the South Asian community and the fathers in particular, and they already feel kind of ostracised by the court system. How do they see that? And you've already touched upon it, but if you can expand, how do they find themselves within the family court system?
I think they, before even going to court, probably feel like they're not going to get far, because there's this myth that mothers are a kind of the upper hand, if you want. And I always try to explain it's all about the children, and it's about what the children's needs and wishes and feelings and what the circumstances are. I mean, I've seen a huge shift in the last year alone in regards to a huge shared cared kind of approach by the courts. And I always try to tell my clients that there's been a massive shift in the last 4 to 5 years. I think massively we've seen it, about there being a huge shared cared approach being filed towards fathers. I mean, in the last year, for example, there was loads of finding of fact hearings coming up about domestic abuse, and the court's view is it necessary? Is it proportionate? Do we need it? And I think in the last 6 months, we've had one finding of fact hearing in about 6 months, which is a massive change to what we were usually.
I remember they used to be par for the course, didn't
they?
they?
Did, and that used to cause majority of the delay, which then used to cause fathers not spending a lot of time with the children, which used to have an impact on the case in itself. So I think that's massively changed. The system's changed it for the fathers as well.
Yeah, okay. Sandeep, what do you think about dads in family law?
I mean, I love representing dads, because I do feel, unfortunately, they do still have an uphill battle. It's very difficult for them. There's sometimes allegations that are made, and they are made fraudulently, and it can be devastating because they don't get to see children, and it can take months to remedy that situation. But talking what Sabeena was just talking about there, we've recently had a case where it was some allegations made about domestic abuse, and I was informed by counsel that less than 1% of cases get listed for a fact find. But on this matter, it's been listed for a 3-day fact find hearing.
Okay.
So it'd be very interesting to see how that progresses.
And what are the sticking points, Harj? I mean, we've talked about the sort of lack of confidence of South Asian dads going into the family court system. We've talked about the whole, you know, false allegations being made. CAFCAS is one that comes up again and again for my team, you know, because of the lack of representation and diversity within the CAFCAS system, within the offices themselves. And sometimes, although, you know, we trust them to do, you know, an independent job and their duties to the court, but time and time again, we're getting reports where it seems that they don't understand the culture or the relationship that dads have. Do you find that within your cases?
Not as much. With any dads, I think, taking it to court, even mums, they're all very cautious and worried about what the outcome will be. But with dads, I think they do face an uphill struggle. And sometimes I find, and we've got a case on at the minute, where really spurious allegations are made, no evidence at all, contact stopped. And it's the delay, it's the cost, it's months and months and months before you get to the bottom of it. And then in this particular case, our client didn't want a fact-finding hearing, and nor did mum, but we advised, how are we ever going to resolve this? She's made all these allegations, but didn't really nail the colours to the mast. And Upton left with the baby, that we have now got that one listed for a fact-finding hearing. In some cases, you do need them. I think this new scheme that's come into play, you know, the Pathfinder, should really help, because it gets to the nub of the problem very, very quickly. It's very, you know, a very detailed report. As soon as proceedings are issued within 8 weeks, and the impact on the child about the fallout, whereas I think historically they've been very, very difficult cases to deal with because of the delay. And yes, CAFCAS are doing their best, but they're understaffed, and I don't think there is diversity in the CAFCAS team.
Definitely.
Sometimes they don't understand how South Asian families work and operate, or the needs of the children in South Asian families. The role of dad in South Asian families historically, and that does impact. But I think the Pathfinder scheme that's been introduced should alleviate some of those problems.
But just following on from that, Harjit, with CAFCAS, I think they are under-resourced at the moment. I think I read something recently where they said that they needed 200 extra CAFCAS officers so that when this Pathfinder pilot scheme rolls out nationally, they can prepare the child impact reports and do the work required. So I think from that basis as well, it's difficult for them because it's very front-loaded, is the Pathfinder pilot scheme. There is still quite a lot of work to be done, albeit it's done differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great idea in principle, isn't it, Sabeena? But if you haven't got the resources to provide those reports and provide the diversity, I mean, it can make a world of difference if you have a male CAFCAS officer and if you've got a female, if you've got somebody with a diverse background, and if you haven't, you know, it's a bit like a lottery draw sometimes.
And I don't think, sorry to interrupt, but I don't think there are many male CAFCAS officers at all.
I've had two probably that I've come across, and the results were starkly different with the outcomes in terms of what dad could achieve and the understanding and the confidence in the actual report because of that. So Sabeena, you were going to say something?
So I mean, my experience of CAFCAS recently has been quite shocking, I'm going to say, and I'll tell you why, because I mean, I've had 3 different cases in the last 6 months. All of them, one we didn't have a finding of fact hearing, mum took her allegations away, one we won the finding of fact hearing, there were no allegations, and the third one was things happened but both parties were happy that the contact wasn't affected and we can move on. But CAFCAS came back and said limited contact because of these allegations. I mean, when you've got a parent, a mother saying this contact can go ahead and progress, and the courts are saying yes, I think the CAFCAS either need a bit more training, a lot more diversity and understanding of that culture. I mean, I had one CAFCAS officer saying that dad was really strict because he asked his 3-year-old daughter to wear a scarf. And he said, well, yeah, he just said she looks cute if you put a scarf on. That doesn't mean he was controlling.
But they made it into like a religious context.
They kind of said that he was a strict Muslim dad, and he said, how? And I think it's stuff like that that people don't understand. And the dad was frustrated as anything, as you can imagine. And it's stuff like that, and I think it's representing those type of dads can sometimes get quite frustrating because it's unfair, because they should have to push to get a fair result.
But do you also think that there's a lack of what do they do next? I often find from when I first started practicing that there used to be a range of dad could do this course, he could do that course, he could do this course, but there doesn't seem to be anything like that. So if they get a damning report, then what's the next step? It's like many people give up at that point in the court system, and so. You know, that's something. So to bring back to Andrew McFarlane and him saying that there needs to be more resources available, what other things would you suggest? And we've talked about all different kinds of families, you know, dad-led, we've talked about South Asian community, the pressures that they all feel, when pressure starts to overtake the actual, what would be the best outcome for the family. But what things, I mean, the question I'll finish with is what can our listeners do if they're in the situation of court or not? But before I get to that is what can the system do? So we've got the court system, we've got, you mentioned non-court dispute resolution by way of mediation. Is there anything else you think that can be provided for these kind of families that might circumvent them or stop them coming directly to court if those things don't work? Is there any other things that you can suggest that could be a resource for families to use before they then think, right, court is the only option?
I think something like, I mean, if you're going to go away and mediate and you come up with a result, what's next? For example, you said about the courses, dad could go on courses. I had a dad really proactive, did all the courses, went to court, and CAFCAS said, well, actually, that court's not approved. Could you go do another course? But then couldn't say what course this father could do. But he'd done everything available to him. And it's about having available what courses fathers can do or mothers. How that would change things, and is it going to help and move matters forward? I think that's massive.
That's very
because
useful.
You've got fathers really going out, doing what they need to do, and then coming to court and saying, well, actually, that's not what we want, but we don't really know what we want as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
What about mums, Sandeep, then? If they found themselves in this crossroads, what can we do to support mothers more?
I think obviously there's concerns about domestic abuse, and
Yeah.
with cases such as that, you know, you have to go to court,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But again, it's just courses. I can't really think of anything else which would really help, because I always think that knowledge is power, right? So if they can see the options available, and I think the concern is, and I can't stress this enough, having just qualified as a mediator, that leaving the decision about what happens to your child, it's huge, and you're then leaving that decision to someone who doesn't know you.
It's a really good point you mention, and I say this to clients again and again, that at this moment in time before court, you're in control. And you know, if you want to keep it within your control, I don't mean control as in over controlling, but you get a say so in the decision making process.
Absolutely, yeah.
Once it's within the court remit, then it's gone. What about you, Harj? Anything else you can suggest?
It is really difficult, and it's really interesting the point you make, because sometimes CAFCAS will identify what needs to be done, but they can't refer you to where you should go, so your clients are left finding that themselves to satisfy the requirements. But other than mediation, and to include hybrid mediation where lawyers can be involved, or round the table meetings, if there aren't any safeguarding concerns or courses that either parent needs to attend, it's just a dispute about the arrangements, but you don't want to go to court, it is considering every other non-court dispute resolution that's available. And to include arbitration, you know, a private judge, as it were, as opposed to going through all the court process, which then would involve the CAFCAS becoming involved and delay. We might not need that, we just need a decision. And sometimes it's, let's just have that decision. There are no welfare or safeguarding concerns. You don't need to go to court. You can actually go to arbitration, and let's just have the decision.
What about learning? What about knowledge, like you mentioned earlier? Now, one of the past presidents, I don't know if you remember, she was the first black female president, Stephanie Boyce. She's very passionate about early learning in law, right? So at schools they're taught Pythagoras, they're taught all this kind of stuff. But what about knowing their legal rights? And I say that because often I'll get, it could be dads, it could be mums, that are saying that this is what we've been told. We've been told we're not going to see our child if we do A, B and C, or what are my rights, or things have got to such a bad stage because both parties, both parents are not aware of what the other can and can't do and what they can and can't do. So if they had that information early, if they had that learning early, do you think that would take the sting out of parties rocking up to court and saying we want our say?
Yeah, I mean, in relation to that, I think so, yes. I think one of the things about mediation is that you are given those options as soon as you go to your first intake assessment meeting. You know, the mediator outlines what their options are, and then they're impartial. So it really is stressed that you are in charge of this, and it's up to the clients then to come up with their own solutions. And so they can go and get some legal advice in the background, but they are still trying to drive negotiations forward and come to their own solutions.
That's good. Sabeena?
I mean, I think it should be involved in early learning, such as schools,
Yeah,
something
I
like
agree.
in personal development.
I agree.
Because law, I mean, as soon as you're born, you're hit with law as soon as you're born, aren't you? You're hit with all these different laws. And I think, I mean, one of the big ones for me is I see people that have had nikah marriages and they come up to me 30 years on thinking that they're protected, but in fact, they've never been married. And I've had so many women and men walk out the door thinking, I've left with nothing, and the battle that I've got to go down, the talata route, is going to be so expensive. And it's just knowing, just basic knowledge about yourself. So I do think maybe schools and education system do need a little bit in there about law, just to make.
I think it's
people
essential,
self-sufficient.
and your nikah point is that's another podcast for another day, I think. So same time next month, I think. But yeah, I just feel that when you have clients that come to you and say, things got a lot worse because she said I couldn't see him because I wasn't on the birth certificate, for example. We know that's not true, but to a client who's experiencing the emotions of a breakup, a separation, looking and anticipating that they might not see their child, emotions get heightened and the thing gets a lot worse. So
and it's really basic knowledge, isn't it?
But I find that that's now available. I have a lot of clients that do their research before they come. You've got your Google and your ChatGPT.
Bane of our life,
it is.
Don't get me started on that.
But I think that's why it's really, really important for clients to have very early legal advice, for that very reason, that there's that delay or that worry, that anxiety that what my wife has told me is right. But it's very daunting for clients to come to take that first step, and that's why this information sharing that you're doing, like this, and podcasts and articles and information that's available is key. But how do clients know what's available and to access? And so I do agree with your point that early education, even at schools, would help that.
Certainly would.
Or even a course before you get married.
I know. Well, why not? I mean, we have courses for everything else. Everyone does their research into everything. But with marriage, and I've done podcast, audio and visual on this, that everyone's rushing to book the hall and the lenga and the makeup artist. But it's like not thinking about what's the step before that.
How's your life going to change?
How's your life going to change? So, so before we finish, the last question, and we could talk for hours, I know we could, but the last question I think to each of you is, if someone is listening to you guys today and is on the precipice of, I'm about to go to court, I'm going to seek legal advice, what would be your top tip or your top tips for them to consider before they do? And I know we've all mentioned it, but just in like bullet points, what would you say they should consider before issuing?
I think costs is a huge one. So do your research on lawyers that you can afford. There's no point going to a top lawyer if you're going to run out of money after the first 2 sessions with them. So planning, budget-wise.
Can I just follow up on that, because that's again a really good point, because often you'll get this misunderstanding or misconception that legal aid is available for everything, and they'll say, okay, well, we'll go to a legal aid lawyer, but that since 2013 has shrunk, that fund, and it's only really around anything to do with domestic abuse matters, so it's very difficult to do that. So costing is a very, very important factor.
Delay, the damage to your co-parenting relationship.
Very good point.
You know, even if you're separating, you're still co-parenting. Why take that step that's so acrimonious at the very beginning? Because when solicitors are out of the picture, you have still got to have a relationship for many, many years to co-parent these children, and there's a lot better ways to resolve the dispute. So going straight to court immediately, you've factored in months and months of delay, and the kids are not going to see one or other parent. It gets acrimonious, it's cost, it's delay. So if a client is thinking, right, court is where I'm going, stop, seek legal advice immediately, because there are a lot of other options that are time and cost effective that you might not have thought about.
That's a brilliant point. And again, you know, if I can make a comment in regards to that, is that when couples come to us, or the client in particular, and they've just separated, gone through a breakup, I'll often say to them, you're never going to erase that other parent from that child's life. It's not going to happen. As much as they might hate them in that moment, you know, they might have suffered, whatever, there's got to be some common sense thinking about how we're going to manage this situation, whether it is through court, if there's a domestic abuse element, or whether it's just taking control, like you mentioned, Sabeena, and thinking about the process before we get to the court stage, because that parent will always be there. As long as the child's there, the parent will always be there.
And I think my top tips are get legal advice first, don't rush to court, take on the advice that's given. So while you might have people at home and Google and ChatGPT, nothing can ever replace legal advice. I mean, all of us here are senior lawyers, and the advice that we give is never going to be Google and ChatGPT. And in fact, I've had a recent client that said, but your advice did not tell me what ChatGPT, and I said, it's never going to be the same. And I always say, keep your emotions at bay, because family is probably the most emotive thing ever in our lives.
That's right.
So naturally, emotions are going to be high. So get advice, keep your emotions in check, and, you know, remember that mean, I always say you can be related to your 18, but reality is even after 18.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Oh, it gets harder, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah.
And I think it's really think about how your relationship's going to change if you go to court and how that's really going to impact on, because the solicitor's going to be out of the picture, like you said, but you two have got to get on with each other and the families have got to get in each other. And I think if you can deal with it through mediation, arbitration, solicitors' correspondence, or even out-of-court settlements, it's probably the best way forward.
Yeah, great tips, honestly.
Yeah.
And ChatGTP and Google can't give you a tissue when you're going through it. And we know a lot of our job is just putting ourselves in that kind of position and empathising before we can bring them out to the logical decisions they need to make. So I've absolutely loved this conversation today, and I wish we could go on for longer, but I think we are going to have a part 2 and a part 3.
Absolutely.
Sandeep, Sabeena, Harj, thank you so much for joining me today. Let us know in any comments that you've got. If you've got any further questions, we're happy to take it up at the next podcast session. See you next time.